Welcome to the Enterprise Excellence Podcast, where our purpose is to help create a better future. Learn from our world's experts how to improve your organisation sustainably. Learn how to achieve and sustain an excellence journey for yourself, others, and the planet.
I'm your host, Brad Jennings, coming to you from Brisbane, Australia.
Welcome to episode 15 of the Enterprise Excellence Podcast. It is such a pleasure to have Renee Smith on the show. Renee previously served as the Director of Workplace Transformation for Washington State as part of the Governor's Results Washington team. Renee has championed a more humane and effective workplace. Renee is a researcher, writer, and speaker globally on the topic of making work more humane by increasing love and decreasing fear in the workplace. Let's get into the episode. Renee, thank you for joining us on the podcast to share your knowledge and help us create a better future. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Brad. It's really a pleasure to be here with you today. Good to see you. Thanks for having me.
Renee, I'm keen to start with your backstory. What are some key elements in your life that really started to form who you've become in this field of enterprise excellence and transformation and humanistic approaches?
Yeah. I grew up here in the Puget Sound area in the state of Washington, in the other Washington, as we like to say, and had a happy childhood and went off to college and then kind of lost my way, actually. So, some of the personal things that happened early on really feed into and shape who I am today and how I kind of carry this work. And in that, losing my way, dropping out of school, ending up getting married, having a couple kids, moving to Alaska. And through that time, kind of dropping the pursuit of the things that I loved and following after my husband's interests. But there was an accident. He was in an accident in a plane crash when I was 27, he was 31, and we had these two little boys, and really life was never the same again. And that kind of thrust us into 8 years of, and thrust me into 8 years of caregiving and, trying to make kind of the best of things, really, trying to cope with this kind of set of cards I'd been dealt and, keep my commitments and honor those promises and carry on with life as best I could. And eventually, we had a couple more kids and eventually, though, realized that after 8 years that I just felt kind of released from the situation. It was a very difficult situation and felt released. And then it was time to get my life back, right? And to discover, reclaim my path, find my voice again, and discover what I was going to do with my life. So went back to school and to, finished my undergrad and then went to graduate school and kind of found my people, found my calling and organization development. And so, that early as a young adult, having such a huge challenge, I think it cultivated something in me that could face hard moments, that knew that I could do hard things, that I could persevere through. I used to have the saying that I could do anything for 2 years, that was this 2-year cycle of trying to get through school, with all the kids and all the crazy chaos and everything, but persevering through that to get to something better. And, did a few cycles of that. And eventually, in a sense, it was kind of like PDCAing my way into a new life, if you will, right? But eventually found my way into work in, did consulting work and then did work in at the University of Washington, Tacoma campus in organization development, which is where I encountered lean and really learned about lean and continuous improvement, doing that work on a campus and developing a program for the campus. And so then that really took me into state government. Eventually, I was offered a position in an agency just when our state was really embarking on its lean transformation journey back in 2011, 12, in that era. That's when that happened. So those were a few early experiences that were difficult, right? But that planted some seeds that would become important later.
Yeah, Renee, it's a really tough early backstory that you spoke about. I can understand you would have gone through a lot of hardship there. But and so it really taught you some resilience. and strength to persevere.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, to persevere. I mean, it also cultivated like deep empathy in me, deep compassion for people, and like a sensing about what people are facing. And you know, many people, I mean, eventually, really, we all go through something. We all go through things. Now we're all sort of collectively going through a massive thing, for sure. And individually, though, you know, we face those moments of personal crisis. And so I have a lot of compassion for people who are facing those situations, and I don't know, the ability to tap in, I think, to where people are on a human level. That just came from, you know, facing my own difficulties, and that's played certainly into what I do today.
And that's amazing. I can really see the path there of that, the challenges you had early in your life. And I guess you had the experience of those playing out with the workplace too, and how you then managed your way through university and your career. And is that what led you partly down this path of knowing that, right, humans are humans, and there's this humanistic element that comes to work?
Yeah, it's interesting. You know, I don't know that I personally ever didn't think humans were humans, right? And I think I've always sort of brought that, but then, you know, we get introduced. And I think I've maintained that all along the way. It certainly was the way that I have led over the years when I've, you know, managed and led teams, and, you know, been an executive in organizations. So that's been a sensibility that I've always carried, but I've certainly witnessed that other people have it scared out of them, beaten out of them, you know, threatened out of them. Or, you know, for whatever, like it has been taken out of or removed, or that option taken off the table for so many people. Sometimes from before they have, you know, they get anywhere near a workplace. Some of it originates from the time people are little tiny humans, you know, that people learn to not be fully human. They learn to not have emotions, to not be sensing, you know, in their body, to leave their intuition behind, to deny different parts of themselves. And so, yeah, watching the fallout of that and people struggle with that is something that I've been aware of, but thankfully have stayed pretty connected myself through it all. So,
And Renee, I know you've had a long career in the public sector, and that evolved into this space you're in now around, you know, a humane approach to the workplace, increasing love, decreasing fear. How did that evolve through your time with Washington State?
Yeah, so, you know, I was leading lean transformation services inside a state agency at the Department of Enterprise Services for the state of Washington. And so my job was to help cultivate this lean culture, and the entire state was embarking at that point on embracing lean as a operating system, as a culture and way of working. And you know, I had a lot of great leadership support, and we were really going after it and getting some great results, and you know, changing the way people were experiencing their work and the way that they were delivering services. And then just in the course of doing that, we were getting ready to present at a lean conference. We had some teams that were presenting at this huge lean conference that we put on as a state, a couple thousand people over a couple days. And our teams were preparing, and I was having a conversation with our executive director, like the leader of our agency, Chris Lew. And Chris was a really seasoned leader. Chris had been in private sector for many years. He'd actually had training at Toyota way back in the day, you know, so he had a deep understanding of this and his own style and experiences too. And he and I were talking about leadership and about what it took, like the culture that it took to create the kind of environment, the kind of results, you know, that these teams were getting. Like, what did it take? What were we putting in place? And so in the course of this conversation, I eventually asked him, so, okay, Chris, let's get real. Tell me, what do you think is the most important job of a leader? And I will never forget what he said. He immediately answered, to eliminate fear from the workplace. And it's beautiful when you hear your executive say something like that, right? It was music to my ears, and I resonated with it as something that I had seen him try to do, and you know, encourage us as his executive team to lead that way. And it made sense that good things had happened when we'd done that, and not such good things when we'd missed it. And So it resonated, but it also only seemed like half the story. So it seemed like, okay, we're going to decrease fear, get that, that makes sense, but what takes its place? And after a lot of consideration, I came to the conclusion that it's love. That, like, forget about all of our opinions about what we think about whether love is something at work or not. Just, from a human perspective, fear and love, two primary human experiences. All of the negative stems from fear, all of the positive stems from love. And so if that's true, then, and I came to really believe that it is, then the question is, what do those things look like at work? How do those manifest at work? What are the impacts of those at work? And if we are decreasing fear to, create a space where people will speak up, answer questions, offer ideas, do PDCA and the kata routine and all the different, applying all the tools and techniques and mental models and all the good things that we love, and trying to create a more improved work place and results for customers, then, it's not only the decreasing fear, but it's creating an environment that really embraces that. And I came to believe that was true. I came to realize that really expressed, when we were at our best, that expressed what was happening. And so that became like the catalyst for me understanding what we were doing and how to sort of, what would I say? What we should be aiming for and cultivating when we're trying to create organizations that do good in the world.
Renee, that was very impressive. Thank you for that story. I gained myself a lot from just listening to what you just said just then. It really sounded to me like there's all these tools and techniques, and there's all these approaches we can apply to work to try and make it better. But then at the heart of it, if you've got fear and you don't have love and care for employees, it's not going to work. Is that what you found? Is that what you're saying? Or am I
Absolutely.
off track?
No, you're totally on track. And, if you think about it, respect for people is sort of the lean jargon that we would use. That's the sort of this, and it is true. That's a core tenet of a lean culture. And we often use that language. And I love John Miller's translation of the Japanese character, or the characters that are respect for people. And, he went back and looked at that and researched that and translated that as holding precious what it is to be human. Right? Isn't that beautiful?
That's nice. It's lovely.
Holding precious what it is to be human. So, really what that says to me is that it asks some things of us, right? If we're going to have this respect for people in this culture that we're trying to build, then that means that I need to hold precious the humanity of my team members, right? That's underneath all of anything else that we would do, is holding precious, deeply caring for the humanity of my team members. And it means that I'm going to hold precious the humanity of my customers, and deeply caring for them as human beings. And if we hold that up, if we hold that mental model, then that asks some things of us, right? That then motivates why we would use any of the improvement techniques that we believe in the first place. I think it's useful to think about sort of what we think lean is, how we would define lean. And I've come to believe that, and I actually love to ask people this. So maybe we could, we'll do a little thought experiment, right? So if our listeners were to, to just jot for a moment, make a note on a piece of paper, if you're at a barbecue, and if you're in Australia, so I'd say you were throwing some shrimp on the Barbie, right?
Yes, definitely.
If you were doing that, and with friends and whatever, in the pre-COVID day, maybe we've got our masks on, we're 6 feet apart, but we're in this social situation, and somebody says, "Well, I hear you do that lean thing. What is lean?" Right? What is lean? So what would you say? And if listeners were to make some notes about that, they might write, well, lean's about eliminating waste, right? Or it's about respect for people, or it's about continuous process improvement, or right, all of the things. And what I would offer is that those are all true, but if our language matters, our verbs matter, and that those are kind of scattered along an array of the definition that I would offer, which is that Lean is a human-centered philosophy of work, or a human-centered approach to work. Like at its highest level, that's what it is. And so if we hold that, Lean is this human-centered approach, and that approach creates a culture that has certain principles and values, and it uses certain methods and tools, right? And it results in certain things. It results in, continuous improvement and delivering better value to customer and flow and so on. And if you were to look at, if you were to ask 10 people to answer that what is Lean question, and give all those answers, the stickies that they would put those on could be arrayed between our, the cultural principles and values, the methods and tools, and the results, right? And it's important, I think, to get that clear, to keep that straight. But that over all of that is this idea that Lean is a human-centered philosophy of work.
It really sounds to me, Renee, like you're describing that as the enabler, that is the foundation of everything else working.
Yeah, in a sense, it's our why, right? It's the center of our golden circle. It's our why, in Simon Sinek's terms. So yeah.
Renee, within the public sector, so you had Chris you're working with and other executive people. Mm-hmm. What are some stories and some ways that you went about removing fear from Washington State and bringing more love into what you did there? Some case examples.
Oh, goodness. Let's see. So, I think about one leader. There's several that come to mind. So, one leader who's not at DES anymore, not at the same agency anymore, but Jeff Kanan was a leader that came in as a new director over a particular, associate director, whatever, over a particular area that had really struggled. And the agency that he was coming into had been we had been a merger of 5 different agencies into one new agency. And this was a part of the agency that sort of, was coming along a little bit later in their transformation into, they're coming along with that program, if you will. It can be a hard transition to go from being their own thing until this new thing. And so he was coming in as a leader to help them along with that. And, there was the usual kinds of, difficulties, human difficulties that people were having in adopting a new way of working and becoming one team, in tending to the customer in some new ways that they hadn't before, and all the things that are necessary really to make improvements to the process so that people, will use the products and services that we offered. And I should say that this agency was unique in that it was a fee-for-service model. So we really did operate in an entrepreneurial business, like we did business, government as business kind of fashion, if you will. So he came in and really cultivated deep, caring relationships with his team, and helped, created a real sense of safety, and built a culture where people really went after trying to deeply understand what customers needed, what they needed to be satisfied. And out of that, understanding what they needed to be satisfied, design products and services to those needs and measured their performance against those expectations. And turned that business unit around, and did really incredible work there. Which I think his example is the epitome of what really caring lean leadership looks like. I don't know if he would have put that term on it at the end, but he did epitomize, or in the beginning, but he did epitomize that in that way. I think another leader that I think of that was a great example of respect for people and of living, putting love in action, is a leader that we worked with. My team worked with Rick Garza at at first it was the Liquor Control Board, and then it became the Liquor and Cannabis Board after we legalized marijuana. And he had a leader on his team who made a really public mistake, right? And, if you think about what, to contrast what fear in action would look like with that really public mistake, you can imagine it's throw him under the bus, or kind of hang them out to dry, public shaming, reading them the riot act, or maybe they lose their job, or they're just like marginalized and they're still there. They get to still be there, but they don't really, they're persona non grata. But instead, Rick reached out to this person and let them know that that he was there for them, and that they were family, and that they weren't alone, and coached and mentored that person through the correcting of the mistake. And that person went on to continue to have a really successful leadership career with that organization, which, is sort of an example, that they were doing improvement work was part of what they were doing, part of the backdrop of this team. But they could have lost that leader just, in the sense of like being inhumane in the way that they were, and the way that he handled this circumstance with her. So that's a couple examples.
Yeah, and it really sounds to me like the leadership is at the heart of it, whether we have fear or love. And then I've also heard that it sounds like there's some pivotal moments that can really play a big part, whether our culture goes forward with fear or goes forward with love.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think we face all kinds of moments that I would call them moments that matter all the time. They're moments when, we've declared some things. Maybe we've said, we're this kind of place. We want you to behave in these certain ways. We want you to point out the problem or speak up or offer your idea, or, do rounds of testing to show if your idea works or not, and all the things that we do. We've done improvement cycles, and now there's this change that's needed, and it has implications for people. And so we've got to come to terms with all that. And all of those experiences are human moments, right? And if we handle those human moments in ways that are callous, or if we say, hey, we're all about people, but then in the moment when it really matters, I can't look you in the eye, or, I'm dismissive of your idea, or we, blaze right through something, or, all that's going fine, but you have a personal crisis, and, I can't sit with you for 10 minutes and let you just talk about what's going on, with your sick parent, or your dying kid, or, whatever the situation is. People face things all the time. And if we are not there for each other in ways that really count, that show that we care for each other's humanity, then whatever we've declared is null and void. Whatever trust that would have engendered will be lost. And, now, am I going to speak up next time? Probably not. Am I going to go the extra mile? Probably not. How that would play out. Yeah.
I love that, Renee. Moments that matter. How do leaders, what do you coach a leader or talk to a leader about in relation to how to identify moments that matter, and then how to deal with moments that matter? Is there some techniques that you typically talk about?
So I think a couple things are necessary to that. One is that, leaders have to be doing their own work on themselves. So it's not only am I going to create a space where people can bring their whole selves, but I need to be working on being a fully integrated present human. So not just my intellect, I need to be tuned into my own emotions, to my own physical body, to my intuition, my relationships, all my identities. I'm bringing my whole self and inviting you to bring your whole self. I think leaders get into a lot of jeopardy when, someone is coming to them with a need, and if we're just trying to meet that need only with our intellect and not with our full humanity, then we're in peril there. That often will not go well. So we've got to be, more integrated and fully present with people. One of the things that I also encouraged, a tool that I introduced, is like a simple kind of compare and contrast tool. So in any given challenge that we have as leaders or team members too, this could apply to anyone, there's always a choice about how we live into that challenge. So, let's say there's going to be some change in composition to the team. We're getting new team members that are coming on board. Well, we can handle that change in a way that creates fear for the team, or we can manage, lead into that change in a way that creates essentially a sense of love, safety, connectedness, compassion, kindness, respect, trust, right? And so there are two very different sets of behaviors. And so the exercise is identify the challenge. So that, the team composition is changing. Who's impacted by the challenge? Get clear on that, who all the people are. And then part one, think through what can I do to create fear? What's my plan for fear? And we know, right? We know sometimes we got to pause and like slow down a little bit to think about it, but we know the things like poor communication, like surprising people, not explaining what's, happening, not providing people the resources they need and not giving them time to get to know each other. We can make that list of what would create fear in that scenario. So we've got that list now. Now turn to the other side of the sheet of paper, if you will. And what would be the plan to create a sense of love, safety, connectedness, respect, trust, and so on. And we make that list, make that plan. And if we, that's sort of using our own intuition, our own insights, our own human experience, but it also could be sitting down with your team and saying, listen, we've got this change coming. Tell me what's going to help you to feel safe, cared about, loved, if you're using that word, or other versions of it, respected, trusted, and so on. What would help you to, for this to be a good experience? Let me know. And what would make it go sideways? What could I do here that would make you afraid, that would make you feel disconnected, that would make you feel marginalized or uncertain or overwhelmed? And just ask them directly, get that feedback. And now we know, don't do these things, right? Don't do the first set of things and do the second set of things.
What an impressive, engagement, empowerment, and collaboration approach. That's really powerful.
Thank you. There's a lot of application to that too, right? I mean, you can almost anything that we're doing, even in strategic planning, it could be in the implementation of an improvement that we're making. We can pause. That's like a lens that we could apply to anything. Pause and consider, how do we move this forward now? We know it's a good new way to work. How do we move forward with this now in a way that does not create fear and that does create love?
Renee, what do you believe stops leaders pausing and doing that? What have you seen that impacts?
Yeah, well, certainly, and we see this a lot right now, just the overwhelm of just trying to, get through the day, survive, the amount of pressure that's on people, generally speaking. It was bad before, right? The sense of time pressure, too many things to pay attention to, all of that overwhelm was true before, and it is even more so now, and is even more difficult now just because of, in many cases, the physical distance that people have, the remoteness from each other. But I also think there's something about just not being clear on, how people are experiencing, the environmental conditions. I think if for most leaders really care. Most leaders want to be good leaders. Most leaders, want people to feel connected and safe and, and I don't mean not uncomfortable. There's definitely, I should be clear, there's a place for discomfort that has nothing to do with toxic fear. So most leaders, want to do well and do good too. But they often are distant from the experience of their team members. And don't realize, that this little behavior or this omission of doing something is freaking people out, And so, I think tuning in, plugging in, either asking or getting good advice, or just plugging into their own experience, remembering their own experience, can help to cultivate that empathy and wiser actions in those terms.
I love that term there you used around their own experience, because invariably a leader is been in his team member's shoes at some stage. Typically he or her has been in that role. Right,
exactly. Well, I have found that, my work is based on research that I did. I interviewed people. I've done primary research interviews, asking people their stories about times when they felt afraid at work, times when they felt loved at work. And, collected those stories, analyzed them for themes and content, and came away really clear about how damaging fear is and how beneficial love is, and all of the forms that we all want at work. Not romantic, love, of course, but all of the forms that do belong, that respect, trust, kindness, empathy, inclusion, and so on. And when we it's the tapping into our stories that connects for people. It's, when I share stories, people recall their own stories, and there's an identification there that sort of de-escalates all the protests that people might have about the L word,
So, Renee, on that, tapping into your stories, are you implying there too that piece of vulnerability, being open to share your stories and connect in that regard too?
In terms of leaders?
Yeah.
Definitely. I think Brene Brown has schooled us all so beautifully,
She's
and
amazing.
normalized it. Yeah, she is, and has normalized this idea of how critical it is to be vulnerable, and to be real with each other, and I think too, the work of Edgar Schein. Humble Inquiry, right? His work, and with his son Peter, they've done beautiful work on helping to understand how, if we're going to create, that sense of psychological safety that's so critical, that it means that those of us who are in positions of power need to sort of not be elevated. We need to reach out and make human connections with people, who we want to work with and who we need to have us tell us things. And it's those human connections happen through vulnerability, through humility, through, person to person contact. So, I think it's good news. Like, this old school way of being, that so many people came up through the ranks with, that was like, check your humanity at the door in order to be professional, is like those days are over. Those days are over. And that should be good news. We don't have to, check our humanity at the door. We get to be fully ourselves, and still be professional. And gosh, if any time has convinced us of that, or like we've seen evidence of that, it's now, right? Our work life, our home life has merged. We get to see people's cats and art, and their children, come in and sit on their laps, and suddenly we are more human than ever. And I actually think that that's a massive benefit to what we've all been subjected to in these last many months.
Renee, I totally agree with you. I've been able to introduce my 2-year-old daughter and my 10-year-old son to more people than I could have ever introduced them to in the past. It's been wonderful. I meet so many other children and cats and dogs, and it's been beautiful.
It is. It's fantastic. And even, sometimes when I'm facilitating, we'll have people, go get an item that will represent something, and, to have access to your life, right? It's all right there. It's really quite meaningful.
Yeah, you can connect at a whole new level in some regards, even though we're virtual.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
Renee, I know you've done a lot of work in the public sector, and now you're out running your own business and working with public and private. Are you finding any difference between the two?
So, there's in some ways that are really not material to what I'm talking about, right? Because at the end of the day, on the human level, no, I mean, how things move sometimes in an organization, or how fast, or any of that might be different, perhaps. But when it comes to the kinds of culture necessary to do whatever our charge is, the kinds of work environments that people want to be in, and day to day, where how we want to spend our time, or give our life energy, whatever our purpose is, whatever whatever our funding stream comes from, whether it comes from tax dollars or sales revenue, that that's kind of immaterial to human beings on a team, collaborating, trying to bring value to those that they serve in some way. And that essentially gets back to, can we make work more human? Can we be together? Can we, it wants us, no matter, what the scenario, we want we want a more human workplace, and a more human way of working in order to do that. So I haven't seen much difference in that.
Yeah. Thanks, Renee.
Yeah.
Renee, where are you going now? What's your focus for the future? You're at this transition stage where you're out in your own practice now. What's your focus now moving forward?
So, before I talk about moving forward, a little bit of help, a little bit to look back. So, I decided in December that it was time for me to go in the spring into private practice. And so I gave notice in December and decided that March 2nd would be my last day. And chose that for various reasons, and had, thinking that I had these hosts ready, people ready to be trained as human workplace hosts all over the world to host gatherings where that would be kind of the catalyst for helping people to discover and practice how to be human at work in localities, right? And then, of course, March 3rd, I'm like at home getting ready to, roll all this out. And by March 6th, it was very apparent, because I'm here in the Seattle area, and, it was very apparent soon that wasn't going to happen. And we've all talked about the pivot. What I was fortunate enough to be able to do was, I hadn't built the next things yet. So the pivot was very natural. It wasn't, okay, I'm not going to build it this way, I'm going to build it this other way. But the purpose is still the same. The purpose is still to help people discover and practice how to be human at work. And so now we'll do it in a virtual setting. And we rapidly prototyped Working Alone Together gathering, a virtual gathering that was really about helping people cope with what they were experiencing in the pandemic. And a few colleagues helped me roll that out from, who were also in private practice, Angie Burwell-Kerr and Shannon Patterson and Greg Flynn, and each in their own practices. And they came together with me, and we did some initial outreach. And within a few weeks, we had, dozens of people in gatherings, and people saying, we want to do this too. And so within like 2 months, I think at that point I had 15 or 18 hosts that had raised their hands, people that had said, we want to affiliate and be hosts. And so within a couple months, we trained all these new hosts. Now we have, I think, 28 who are trained, and we've held dozens and dozens of gatherings for folks all over the world, and reaching into organizations. And so that's all up and running. And we have, people who are reaching out to offer that very particular intervention into to help organizations right now cope with this moment that they're in. And it's like it's not a one thing either. It's sort of adapted to what is the next thing we're experiencing, and how do we help people essentially connect to de-escalate their fear and stress response so that they can come back into themselves and contribute. I mean, we can't let people remain at this really heightened state of threat and fear. We're all running around in a massive fight or flight response. And so it's a method to help people de-escalate that and come into better connection and better contribution. The next phase of what we're coming into is we have a couple things happening. I'm reaching out again and beginning to speak and teach in the fall, and working in organizations more. So there's been a lot of cultivation this last spring of this team. So I'll be doing a lot more advocacy and speaking and declaring the good news, if you will, about more love and less fear, and helping people understand how essential that is right now, and as ever it is. And then our team is ready they're forming pods to rapidly prototype and kind of sense needs, prototype solutions, and take them to market or take them to customers rapidly, and forming kind of cross industry, cross disciplinary teams to bring essentially people who will come together to work in a way that is loving, in order to bring more loving solutions into the world is our charge. So that's what's next for us.
Well, that's been a rapid journey.
Yes, it has. Nothing like doing like 2 years of business development in 3 months or whatever.
It sounds like a very impressive model. How can people get involved if they want to, either to join a group and get involved and partake, or potentially reach out as a facilitator? Yeah,
for sure. So I can be reached at Renee at makeworkmorehuman.com. And then our website, it can be reached a couple ways at ahumanworkplace.com or makeworkmorehuman.com. And there's sign-up forms on there, and, all the usual things to connect with us. And I'm happy to speak with anyone, either about, if they need help in their organization, or speaking, or if they're interested in joining our effort. That's a multidisciplinary growing team that wants to bring more love in the world in all sorts of different ways.
It's needed right now, and I'll put those addresses in the show notes also. Yeah. Renee, I've got one final question for you. What have you learnt recently that you didn't know before?
Such a good question. So I think the thing that's striking me right now as I look out my window, so I just moved last Wednesday, and I've learned personally the power of setting intention and like staying in harmony with what you're supposed to do personally. Again, back to December, I had a strong urge that I wanted to sell my house and move somewhere beautiful, live somewhere where I could look out at nature instead of, I love being in town, but I was ready to look at nature, and I really wanted to be by the water. And so through a series of unexpected events, I did sold my house in the midst of the pandemic, and I closed Friday, and I moved last week, and I am steps from the water and surrounded by trees. And actually, just before we came on to record, I bought a kayak. So I'm living in a real space of joy. But that came from being clear, like listening to that deep inner voice, responding to that, setting a clear intention, taking action. And I've proven to myself again just how important that is. So.
Well, really, really taking that time again yourself to reflect and think and plan and go, what's really important.
Yes. And when we do that, right, this is the space where I'm going to bring my best work into the world. And so, we need to take care of ourselves if we're going to do that. And taking the step this is what that step looked like for me, is to find a place where I will be nurtured in a sense every day. And, that means different things to different people. So getting clear on that and then honoring that as best we can. Certainly, I should say that I want to acknowledge that I'm privileged to be able to do that, right? I'm privileged that I had a house to sell. And that I could, make certain choices. But for whatever way we can do that, of listening to what your heart is longing for and going after that, will set us up to be able to be more present and bring the wisdom and goodness that we have to bring into the world. So the world needs it now. Right?
Yeah.
I know that you're really passionate about the environment, and I believe that, if we're going to solve those tough problems, we've got to be ready to be there with the best that we have. So,
and to do that, like you've said throughout this episode, we've got to be present and we've got to immerse ourselves in that.
Yes.
Renee, thank you so much for your knowledge and wisdom today. I've gained an awful lot, and I'm sure our listeners will. And good luck with everything you're doing into the future to help create more humane workplaces and drive out fear and bring in love. I think it's an amazing cause. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure, Brad. I appreciate it.
What an amazing episode with Ms. Renee Smith. I found it really impressive, focusing on this topic of developing more humane and effective workplaces. I think that's something we can all strive to achieve. The two key takeaways for me were drive out fear and fill the gap with love, and focusing on moments that count. If you're in a workplace, it can cause so many negative aspects. Things getting hidden, not focused on, not talking about challenges, or being fearful of consequences. Being able to get rid of fear and fill it with love and support and development for people to help people grow and develop is truly going to create a better workplace wherever you are. The moments that count was such an amazing concept that Renee covered that allows us to really look for those moments and then choose a different path. To me, this comes back to the natural human capability we've got of choosing that gap between a trigger and response. When we see something or something is raised as a leader or a human in general, we can often get an initial reaction and respond rapidly. But it's the gap between those two, that phase of reason, that we can then use to think about this moment that counts and how should I approach that to create a more humane workplace with less fear and more love, where people are engaged. It's safe to fail as long as we learn from failure, and we get a culture of continuous improvement and excellence. Thanks again, Renee. That was an amazing show. Really appreciate it.